Good evening. I'm Cheryl Chambers, a member of the West County League of Women Voters and tonight's moderator. Our timekeeper is Madeline Cronenberg. Contra Costa District Attorney by the Contra Costa County Library in partnership with the West County League of Women Voters, the Contra Costa County Elections Department, and Contra Costa TV. The District Attorney's Office is responsible for felony and misdemeanor crimes committed in the County of Contra Costa, California. This process is executed through the conduction of grand jury investigations, criminal investigations, plea bargain negotiations, and appeals litigation. The mission of the Contra Costa County District Attorney's Office is to seek justice, enhance public safety for all residents by fairly, ethically, aggressively, and efficiently prosecuting those who violate the law and working. Speaking on the issues tonight and introducing in alphabetical order are candidate Dinah Becton and candidate Paul Graves. Candidate Lawrence Strauss is not in attendance this evening. We have 15 questions organized around 7 topics. Each candidate will have 90 seconds to respond, and a 1-minute rebuttal is available to them. We will start with introduction and opening statements. We'll start in alphabetical order with Ms. Becton, and we'll go in reverse order for closing statements. Ms. Becton, welcome.
Thank you very much, and thank you for those who've organized. It's my pleasure to be able to address you tonight as your district attorney for Contra Costa County. I want to start out just to let you know that I'm a person who grew up in East Oakland. I am the 3rd daughter of an aircraft mechanic and a beautician. I didn't know any lawyers when I was growing up, but I was a little girl who had a really big dream. And I wanted to be a lawyer because I knew that lawyers could find ways to make a difference. So I've been a lawyer now for over 30 years. Part of that time I've served as a judge in Contra Costa Superior Court for 2 years. During that time, I was elected as the presiding judge of the court, which means that I presided over the entire court, including a $54 million budget. I'm also the immediate past president for the National Association of Women Judges. So I bring my leadership experience, eye for efficiency, to bring something different to the district attorney's office. I'm here to keep our community. I'm here to give voice to the victims of crime and to help them to be able to heal. Much more that a prosecutor needs to do in the 21st century. And I'm really glad that I'll have an opportunity to share some of my ideas with you. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Graves?
Thank you, everyone, for being here, and thank you for the people who put this on. I really appreciate it. I graduated law school in 1995, and from that time, I fell in love with this county, and my wife and I decided to raise our family here. Since 1995, I've been diligently serving this community as a prosecutor, and I've spent most of my career prosecuting violent crimes, gang crimes, sexual assault crimes, and homicides. And coming out here to Hercules, I have to tell you, I still remember being at the police department with a homicide that occurred and an attempt murder that occurred in this community, and working with detectives to make sure that we had justice for those victims, and I'm currently in trial on that very case. I moved up through the ranks and earned the job of head of the homicide team, and then I was promoted to my current position, which is Senior Deputy District Attorney in charge of the Family Violence Unit, sexual assault, domestic violence, and elder abuse. I have earned the trust of everyone who has known me throughout the course of my career, including the East Bay Times, who pointed out I'm the only person that has meaningful experience as a prosecutor, and they trust I have the necessary tools to get the job done. I've earned the trust of law enforcement agencies in Contra Costa County, the firefighters, victim advocate Mark Klass, and also defense attorneys who know that I will get the job done. These endorsements show that they trust that I will keep the community safe, I will make the needed changes in the office, and I will serve victims of crime.
Thank you. We'll start with our first question, and the topic involves use of force. Ms. Becton, we'll start with you, and we'll reverse as we go through the questions. The first question is as follows. As district attorney, how would you handle a fatal use of force involving local police?
Well, in Contra Costa County, we're very fortunate to have a protocol in place to handle fatal use of force. When there is a force by police, our protocol is mandatory. It calls for our office to be alongside the investigating agency conducting an independent investigation. At the conclusion of that investigation, we have an opportunity through the Sheriff's Department to hold a coroner's request. And at the conclusion of that, the district attorney, myself, makes the decision as to whether or not there would be any charging decisions made. I think our policy works well. It is a model that has been adopted not only by all of the chiefs in Contra Costa County, but also sought after for other communities as well. I'm tweaking that policy just a little bit because I want to add one additional thing, and that is transparency to the community. And so in reviewing the policy, I am actually going to be placing online our policy so that the public can be aware of what it is. And then also my charging decisions will also be placed online so that in any case where there is a decision not to prosecute, the full decision will be disclosed online so that the public can understand my reasoning and also have an opportunity to view all of my decision-making. It will be online for the public in order for that transparency.
Thank you. Mr. Graves?
I would agree that our officer-involved shooting protocol is the gold standard for the state, if not the country. I myself have been out on those protocols before as the head of the homicide team when I worked in the homicide division. I've been on ground zero and seen what the officers go through and how these can impact the community. We need to be open and transparent in our investigations, and we need to find a better way to build trust between all of our diverse communities and law enforcement. We need to improve our communication. We need to listen to people talk about the issues and actually listen, not just have them talk. We need to engage in a mutual dialogue, and we need compassion and understanding that gets to the heart of the issue. But when we investigate these cases and when we do our outreach to the community and we're being transparent, we also need to make sure that we're remembering, regardless of the circumstances, there's a victim. And they deserve to at least know and have an opportunity to talk to the district attorney about why a decision's made. Throughout the course of my career, I've insisted on taking the front line in that type of dialogue. I will sit there and listen and talk because people need to understand why decisions are being made. And in the course of my career as the head of homicide division, I've done that before. I sat with a victim's family, I've sat with the civil rights attorney, the police chief, and we had a dialogue about why a certain decision was made. People may not always agree, but they deserve to have a DA who at least gives them the opportunity to understand.
Thank you.
May I add something to my response, please?
Yes, you have 1
In
minute
rebuttal.
for...
I just wanted to make it clear, and in fact, in the 6 months that I've served as district attorney, there have been several families who felt that they had been left with unanswered questions, starting with the P.D. Perez family. And I have met with them, and I have agreed to independently review all of the evidence so that I am interested in their feelings on the issue. And so I'm in the process of, and I've invited other families, and we have an additional family coming forward now asking that we have an independent review of that case and a new decision made by the current district attorney. I've agreed to do that. I've offered that to any other families who feel that they haven't gotten answers in the past to come forward, and I will independently review all of the evidence.
Thank you, Mr. Graves. Anything else?
No.
All right, we'll move on to our next topic, which is immigrants' rights. Mr. Graves, you're up first. Here's your question. As DA, what would you do to develop a trusting relationship with the immigrant community in your county?
Well, I've been doing that in the course of my career, and I can say one of the single most important parts of being to have the trust of all of the communities that you represent, including people who are undocumented. If we don't have people who feel comfortable to come forward as victims of crime or witnesses of crime, then we're not serving our community. And so I have done a lot of outreach. I can point out that I was on a Hispanic Chamber of Commerce website talking about this very issue to encourage people to come forward and trust the district attorney's office that we care about you and we will take care of you. I had a 10-year-old girl once who saw her father brutally murdered in Pittsburgh. Years later, it was about 10 years later when she was an adult, I got a call from an immigration lawyer asking me to provide the necessary documentation and police reports to show that she cooperated with the police so that she could actually stay in this country legally. And in there, I dropped everything I was doing because that little girl, who is now a woman, deserved to have a DA's office that actually cared about her. People should not be victimized by the system when they have the courage to come forward as victims or witnesses to crime.
Thank you. Ms. Becton?
So I think what I've tried to do as the district attorney is to take a broader and more strategic approach to the problem. The first thing that I did last September was to convene a caucus with our legislatures, our district attorneys, the court, and also the immigration community to make sure that we're all exploring some of the issues that have, in this atmosphere that we currently have, that causes fear and distrust in our communities. We have to be able to be in a position as institutions to have our community trust, to feel safe, to come forward to the district attorney's office, to report a crime, to feel safe, to come to court and testify, to have that conversation so we could make sure that all of us are coming together in order to create a safe atmosphere for victims. I've also been visiting with them on Saturday at the community college just to address issues concerning DACA and making sure that the students heard my voice and that they knew that they could take the message back to their communities that I stand firmly in support of the immigrant community and that I'm there to be a voice for them. We have a U visa program that we make sure our attorneys are trained on so that when we have victims of crime, that we can assist them in that process. And then finally, as a prosecutor, I've lent my voice to prosecutors around the country who have signed on to briefs to support keeping DACA in place.
Thank you. Our next topic is our jails. And Ms. Beckman, you will be first to answer this question. 63% of people in California's jails are being held pretrial. What steps would you take to safely reduce the rate of pretrial incarceration in our county?
Well, I stand firmly in support of bail reform in our county. It's a really important issue. It is a public safety issue, number one, and a victim safety issue, number two. Public safety and a victim safety issue because, as you mentioned, you used the statistics that I've seen actually show that over 70% of those in our county jail are sitting there awaiting trial. And we have many people who are awaiting trial who simply cannot afford to pay bail. So it's a public safety issue because we have people who, with money, who can get out of custody but still be a danger to our community. We need to have in place a system that makes sure that we're assessing the dangerousness of a person, not based on their ability to pay, but whether or not they're going to get out of jail and do harm to our victims. The second part of it is that it's unfair. It's unfair when we have people who are simply sitting in jail because they cannot afford to post bail. I'm talking about those low-level, nonviolent offenses where we have people sitting there and they can't afford bail. So that's why I stand firmly in support of it. I am in support of the legislation. I've lent my voice to it as well, and I will continue to support having bail reform in Contra Costa County.
Thank you. Mr. Graves?
I support meaningful bail reform, but to be clear, the California Constitution, in 2008, the voters passed the Victims' Bill of Rights. It's known as Marsy's Law. And it says in this Constitution that the primary consideration is the safety of the public and the safety of victims. Now, we have several tools at our disposal. There's release on your own recognizance. There is the current bail schedule. There's factoring in somebody's ability to pay. There's also pretrial release programs. And I support all of those, but we need to proceed carefully. We have an independent judge who reviews the evidence and the risk assessment to that individual. We also in our county have been experimenting with the risk assessment tool to evaluate risk. We need to proceed cautiously because many of you might remember last year in San Francisco, somebody messed up on a risk assessment tool, scored them low, the person got out, the man in the course of a robbery. So we need to be very, very careful how we proceed, and there are ways to do it and make sure we're ensuring the safety of the public. But I can tell you as DA, any bail reform that we do is not going to be a one-size-fits-all. $100 to one person is the equivalent of $1 million to another person, and I agree with that assessment. So factoring in somebody's ability to pay is absolutely something we should do. But in the end, sitting in front of a judge making arguments, the primary consideration is enacted by the voters of the state of California is the safety of the public and the safety of the victims, and that would still be my priority.
Thank you. I have a follow-up. In doing some research on this, I found that the bail in Contra Costa County is some of the highest bail set in the state. So my question to both of you, and I'll start with Ms. Becton, is why is that and what can be done about that to level out the bail levels vis-a-vis the rest of the state?
Sure. In Contra Costa County, we have a process for establishing our bail. The bail is set, it's actually, the final decision rests with the court, and so that is one of the starting places. But I will say that we all have a voice at the table. So in setting the bail, the court does invite, and I've been able to sit in those conversations, not only as the former presiding judge, but also in my role as a criminal judge. So we have an opportunity from the district attorney's office, from the public defender's office to give input regarding the bail. But this is one of the reasons it's so important for us to look at the whole system, because of the fact that we have these very, very high bail schedules, but they don't necessarily protect the public, and they don't necessarily take into account fairness. And so that is why I stand firmly in support of bail. We can have those conversations, but I think what's happening, especially with our legislators and the conversations that are happening all over the state, are ones where we talk about how do we make our system one where we take into account first public safety, victim safety, and how do we also have a system that's fair. And clearly, just having a high bail schedule is not going to meet either of those requirements.
Thank you. Mr. Graves.
The bail schedule has been set by the judges in this county since I've started working here 22 years ago. And yes, the public defenders have a voice at the table. Yes, the prosecutors do, but ultimately the judges. When we talk about ability to pay, that is the judges. When we go in front of the judges, case after case, they're making the determination on what appropriate bail is. Like I said, I agree with reforming bail and meaningful reform and looking at this issue and maybe expediting the way to get ability to pay in front of a judge so they can make a fair determination. In the unit I work in right now, yes, our bail's high. When somebody molests a child and they are under 13, it's at least $100,000. If it's something that could potentially be a life crime, it's $1 million. I can't honestly look all of you in the face and say that that is wrong. We're talking about priorities on bail and making sure that the people who are the biggest risk to our community have the highest bail. And then factoring in, once they're in front of a judge, factoring in whether or not a lower bail is appropriate. Bail doesn't solve all the problems. Many of you may have read in the newspaper that we had somebody who bailed out. He was a pastor of a church, fled right in the middle of trial and went to Mexico, and we're lucky we got him back in my unit. But I understand it doesn't solve all the problems, but when you're talking about pedophiles or rapists or people who are committing serious and violent crimes, the bail needs to be high to protect public safety.
Thank you.
Subtle.
Yes, you may.
And
1 minute,
that's
please.
why I like to make the distinction that having a bail schedule really doesn't solve the problems, because it was just mentioned, we had a person who was on bail who committed some heinous crimes in our community, and he was able to post the bail and be out and about. That's why we need a system where the judge assesses the dangerousness in our community, can make a decision, and in those appropriate cases, set no bail, can make a determination that this particular person is in our community. And that is the distinction that I think we need with bail reform. Not a system that says if you have money, you can get out no matter how dangerous you are in our community, but a system that says we will assess the dangerousness of this person, and if you are a person who's harming children, if you are a person who's committing heinous, do not have an opportunity to be out and about re-victimizing our community.
Thank you. We'll move on to our next topic, rehabilitation and prevention, and this is a question from a member of our audience. Mr. Graves, you are first to answer. What are the top public safety issues facing Contra Costa County, and how does your experience prepare you to handle them?
The list is enormous in our county. Gang violence still exists. We have human trafficking that exists, even though we don't see it every day in our county, and it is a risk to our public safety. Property crimes are up. Residential burglaries are up. People still have guns. We actually need to have a proactive approach to these issues, and my 22 years of experience has shown me an established record, and should show all of you, of being proactive in solving these crimes. I've worked with law enforcement to get proactive on the issue of trafficking, working on getting a joint task force, working with community groups to find transitional housing for exploited children women, and men in our. These are the types of things we need to be focused on. We can't just close our eyes and say, it didn't happen in my neighborhood, so I'm not going to worry about it. Freeway cameras, very, very important tool that we have now in our county to actually catch people who are seeking to kill innocent people on our freeways. These are serious issues. You should be able to go to and from work, to and from home, without the risk of being shot. These are the types of things that we need to be proactive and work with our task force to actually proactively try to stop crimes from occurring before they do, and those are the types of things that I would do as a district attorney.
Thank you. Ms. Becton.
Actually, in my role as district attorney, I've had an opportunity to sit with all of the chiefs of police in Contra Costa County to address this very issue. And in that setting, we actually prioritize what we should be working on from a perspective of law enforcement. And it might surprise some of you because we're already working on issues regarding gangs. We have our Safe Streets Task Forces working quite well. I'm also in the process of exploring ways to set up a human trafficking unit, and we're already addressing issues of guns. But the number one issue that was identified by all of the police chiefs in Contra Costa County was actually all of the misdemeanors and low-level offenses in our system. The reason is because all of them actually have over 16,000 requests for prosecutions that come in every year for low-level and nonviolent crime, zapping the resources of every single agency in our county. The police chiefs in our county asked me to lead a task force to address those very issues. The next issue that was identified as a primary concern was the issue of mental health and those who are in our system being charged with crimes when they have mental health issues for low-level offenses that might be treated differently. And I've also been asked to lead that task force as well.
All right, so that's a good segue into our next question, and Ms. Becton, you'll lead off answering this one. Do you support diversion and mentor programs for first-time offenders age 18 to 25? If so, what would you do as district attorney to promote such programs?
Yeah. So I do support diversion programs in those age groups, but actually in a much broader way as well. But starting with our young people, which I think that is a good age group to start with, because that is probably the age group where you'll find young people committing probably, it's like their peak crime time, if you will. So for those low-level offenses, for those first-time offenders, absolutely support diversion, and I'm working hand in hand, as I just mentioned, with law enforcement to not only review all of the diversion programs that we have in Contra Costa County, but to make sure that we're bringing in the best models and practices from around the country in order to bring in the best programs that we can to Contra Costa County. I'm also currently working on a grant that I'm very excited about for our young girls that are in our and that is a grant that will help us to identify problems as to what brings our girls into the system and how we can better serve them. And the same thing for the boys in our system as well. But I firmly support diversion programs, restorative justice, and all of those programs where we take the low-level nonviolent offenses. These are the same cases that I was talking about when I talked about things that are zapping all of our resources. We need to figure out ways to divert those cases safely away from our criminal justice system so that we can free up the resources of law enforcement and my office as well to handle other matters.
Thank you. Mr. Graves.
I support diversion programs. We've had diversion programs for 22 years I've been in this office. The concern about diversion programs for me and my goal would be is to actually find diversion programs that work. Not just bringing in a company that is going to charge money to have somebody basically go one class and then when they finish 2 years, their record's expunged. There are things that we can do to actually help each group. And I'll give you an example. We started looking at diversion when I took over sexual assault for women who have been arrested for prostitution and young women. And I looked at that and I said, well, why should somebody just pay any money if they are a victim of prostitution, more likely a human trafficking victim? The Johns are the ones that should actually bear the cost of the diversion programs for the young ladies. And what we should have is an actual program that addresses the issues, not just pay money, go to one class, but actually have women who have been victims of human trafficking go talk to the Johns about their experience. Have them sit through it, much like traffic school when you have to go to a traffic ticket, but let them hear about the impact their behavior has on the community. That's something real and something that will stick, especially with the youth. We can't just have them pay money and say diversion and not do anything about it. So I like targeted diversion programs that help get to the root of the issue in that particular individual.
May I use a rebuttal?
Yes, 1 minute, please.
This is an excellent place where I think we're already doing some work. I'm really glad that we're exploring the existing programs that we have for diversion with law enforcement, because we are uncovering the fact that in Contra Costa County we have a number of programs where people can actually pay money and simply satisfy their diversion requirements that way. So I'm glad, because now we'll have an opportunity to get rid of those and replace them with more meaningful programs. We also have another program that's starting up in the Antioch. It's going to be an experimental pilot program there called LEAD. And it is one of those programs that's directed by law enforcement that we'll be able to oversee and give feedback about, so that it actually takes, especially, say, victims of prostitution, and not only divert them away from the criminal justice system, but put in place the resources that people need to be able to make a difference in their ability to work with law enforcement on those programs.
All right, thank you. Mr. Graves, anything else? All right. Okay, let's move on to budget crisis. And Mr. Graves, this is your question. California spends an exorbitant amount of money on corrections at both the state and county level. In developing policies for charging and plea bargaining, how would you consider the emphasis have on both your county and the state's corrections budget?
Statistics always are not a good way to start, but I'm going to tell you some statistics. A study came out, California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation, saying that Contra Costa County was second from the bottom in the rate per 100,000 in the number of people we sent to state prison. In 2015, we were seventh from the bottom, but that had to do with the passage of Prop 47. Interestingly, a study done in 2013 looked at Contra Costa County and said if more counties performed like Contra Costa County, we would not have a prison overcrowding problem. That does not mean we should ignore the issue. What it means is we should target actual crime prevention and bring the crime rate down. My prosecutors will ethically only file cases that they believe they can prove beyond a reasonable doubt. And I insist that supervisors should be proactively looking at pleading cases early if we can reach a fair resolution. Cases should not linger in this system for upwards of 3 years waiting for them to go to trial. That is what a prosecutor can do and a district attorney who's motivated and insists can accomplish.
Thank you. Ms. Becton.
I think in approaching this problem, I would start with, is actually where I've already started, and that's with our youth. The statistics tell us that it takes $143,000 to keep one of our young people incarcerated in juvenile hall per year. And we also know that we're spending only about $10,000 to educate that same child. So I want to make sure that we're concentrating our early efforts on young people, because to the extent that we can keep them out of our criminal justice system, we can begin to reduce that overall population that's coming into our criminal justice system. Our anti-truancy program is a good place to start. We're working with that already, and I'm pleased that we actually have a good program in place that sort of looks at the whole family and treats the whole family so that we can keep our young people in school. Because we know that if we can keep a book in a young person's hand, we're most likely to be able to keep them away from guns and other activity. So I think that that's a really good place to start, budget issues and incarceration. I'll reiterate the importance of the work that we're doing on low-level nonviolent offenses and coming up with the best diversion models to divert those cases away from the criminal justice system, not only safely, but in a way that will save our agency.
Continuing with the conversation on budget, the next question, Ms. Becton, you will start off answering this. What is your experience with managing people and budgets?
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess my most recent experience, of course, is right now in the district attorney's office, where we have a staff of 200, and that we just finished our first presentation under my administration of a budget presentation to the Board of Supervisors. A very, very good and positive experience. Not only was I able to open up the budget in a very new and fresh way, to find cost savings in our budget, to find some funds that were underutilized, and in fact, to find some places where we were doing the work, some work mandated by the state, for example, in child abduction cases that we're required to do, but we were not seeking the reimbursement, charging all of that money to the county. And so we uncovered where we could actually find budget savings and then also create new positions. And I'm very pleased that on our first round of negotiations, we have been recommended to get 14 positions for the district attorney's office. In addition to that, when I was the presiding judge of the Contra Costa County Superior Court, of course, I was in charge of the entire budget for the court, went through many rounds of negotiations with labor and with the state as well to come up with a budget that would actually, thank you, my time's up.
Thank you. Mr. Graves.
Throughout my entire career, I've been considered a manager in the office, even if I didn't hold the title. My door's always been open to every DA who needs advice. I have also supervised the homicide unit, directing investigations, and also assisting with prosecutions. I now currently supervise the family violence unit, and I also am the attorney liaison for our computer system and our new case management system. I was the president of the union and managed our budget, and I was the first president in the history of our county of that union to actually have a formal budget and sit down and work out a budget. I agree with the child abduction, and this actually started last year when we figured out that there was an issue, and I actually instructed the people who work in my unit in child abduction to keep time cards, because the way the county gets the money is it goes to the general fund. And so we needed to have proof of what the budget would be or where this money was going to be so that we could get an increase in our budget. And so I was very proud to work with Paul Holes and others in my unit to make sure we got that org number and we had the time cards there so that we could get that funding. But I've been a manager for 23 years, and like I said, with my attorneys, most importantly, I've been involved in law time as a prosecutor in managing investigations, managing prosecutors, managing trial strategy, and in my opinion, that is the single most important managing experience you need to be a district attorney in Contra.
All right, thank you. Any rebuttal? Okay, let's move on. Juvenile justice is our next topic. Mr. Graves, you were starting off with this answer. What would your policy be regarding charging children in adult court? When would you use your authority to file charges in adult court, and when would you pursue a case in juvenile court?
Well, under the current state of the law, it's not up to me as to whether or not a child gets into adult court. We can file a transfer petition and a judge would make that decision. That decision, in my opinion, would be made only after looking at the total circumstances of the crime, the age of the perpetrator, and also the factors relating to the defendant. But there are times when juveniles commit such heinous crimes that they should be charged in adult court. And I would file that petition for a transfer petition, and I would have a judge make that determination after listening to all the. Doesn't mean we would do it in every case, but the days of a district attorney being able to direct file against a juvenile in adult court are now over. So it is a decision that would be screened by a juvenile judge, and like I said, it would be based on those most heinous crimes and the age of the defendant.
Thank you. Ms. Beckton.
As has been pointed out, the most recent reform laws have taken the discretion from the prosecutor and returned it to the court to determine which cases that are committed by juveniles should be tried in adult court. And so what we do in those cases is, if the crime is heinous enough, then the district attorney has the opportunity to make a request to the court for a transfer hearing. I think the decision to move the case and the discretion back to the judge is a good one, because it does give the judge the opportunity to have an array of information available to them and to use their learned experience in order to review all of the factors of that decision as to whether or not the youth should be charged as adults. And I support that.
Thank you. Our next question, Ms. Beckton, you will start. What would you do to reduce the number of juveniles, particularly African American youth, who are brought into the criminal justice system?
Well, I'll start about talking about some of the things that I'm already currently working on. It's interesting. I just had an opportunity to visit our boys' ranch, which is where some of our young men, our youngest low-level offenders are housed. And this coming week, I'll be also visiting the juvenile hall, which is where our young men and girls are housed. Fortunately, we don't have a facility in Contra Costa County for young girls who commit very low-level offenses. And because of that, even for misdemeanor crimes and very, very non-serious cases, our girls who are in custody are actually locked in juvenile hall. We run about 24 of them having girls in custody with low-level offenses. Wanted to do something about that, and that's why I'm just submitted today, actually, to submit a proposal to the Vera Institute. If we are selected as a county, they will come in and help us to not only determine why we have girls in our system who are committing the offenses, looking at their victimization, and then also helping us to design a good program that can help our girls and keep them out of our criminal justice system. And we'll be doing the same thing for the boys in our system as well, as making sure that we're also keeping our young people in school.
Thank you. Mr. Graves.
Well, anybody who's heard me talk since last year at these forums, I've talked a lot about education and the impact it has on people who end up in custody. And the statistics are staggering, and we can't ignore them. If you're not reading at grade level by the third grade, you are highly, highly likely to not graduate. And if you don't graduate high school, you're highly likely to end up in one of our institutions. I believe I've seen the number as high as 85%. What that tells us as a community is we have an obligation to actually get out in the schools and work very, very hard to change that number, change that dynamic. And I'm very proud of Laura Delahunt and the work she's done in the outreach to schools. I've been out numerous times to some of our school projects to try to inspire and encourage students, hopefully in a career in law enforcement or some sort of career, but we need to do more of these forums. We luckily just did one with 700 with Alhambra High School over Martinez, and it was a big career day. And I think everybody in this room is where they are today because they were inspired by somebody. And we need to find people that are inspire our youth. We need to direct them away from the system. We need to give people hope, and we need to have this outreach to all communities. And if we commit to that as a community and as a DA's office and support that, we can change that number. That is the way you're going to have the most dramatic impact on our community, is to recognize the issue and let's find a way to fix it. And I'm more than happy to lead that charge.
Thank you. Our last question on juvenile justice will go to you, Mr. Graves, first. What policies would you put in place to ensure fair and unbiased use of prosecutorial discretion in juvenile court?
It's the same policy I have throughout the entire district attorney's office. I expect people to be ethical and do their job with integrity. You do not file a case unless you firmly believe you can prove it beyond a reasonable doubt in court. And you also need to take a step back and ask, are we doing the right thing? Those are the two things I insist of the prosecutors who work for me. So you need to look at each case, and if there's a way that we can do an informal diversion or informal probation, it's the right thing to do, then my DAs need to be doing that. They need to ask them. This is not a job where you see a case come across your desk and you file it and you don't consider the consequences. You need to look at every case individually, and you need to decide, is there a way we can do informal probation? Is there a way we can help this individual? Is there a way we can even file a case fairly and ethically, but then come to a disposition that is actually going to target what this issue is? And I don't have a problem with that. I would love to see probations where we have people that have to complete reading a couple books and write a book report, if that's really the issue. I have no issue with that. So that is my philosophy, and it's a very simple one. And if all DAs are doing that, then the people who are in the system are people who are there. The charges they're there because they earned it, and ethically, without regard to race, gender, sexual orientation. They're basically being filed as if it was anybody else. And that's how you can solve the problem, and that's what I would insist on.
Thank you. Ms. Beckton.
Well, it's interesting because in Contra Costa County, the Board of Supervisors did create a racial justice task force. And that task force has provided information that has let us know that there is disparate treatment among our juveniles, that there's disparate treatment with respect to us young people of color in our system. And so one of the things that we need to do, because in Contra Costa County, at a bigger level, we have to understand that we don't have accurate data to be able to address the problem. And it's one of the reasons why I'm already in conversation with an organization that will come in and take a look at our systems and take a look at who's in our system and find out whether there's disparate treatment. We're going to couple a conversation that we're currently having with a UC Berkeley professor who's also going to work alongside the people who are gathering our data so that they can help us to see how to analyze the data, see where the disparate treatment is, and then help us to understand how to solve that problem. And so I think we need to be thinking on that larger scale, including, of course, training for our attorneys in our office, training on implicit bias and all of those kinds of things. But we first need the data so that we can find out where the disparate treatment exists, and then we need the professor to help us understand how to solve it.
Thank you. All right, let's move on to our last topic, drug laws. And Ms. Beckman, you will start with answering this question. Studies show racial disparities in drug law enforcement, despite the fact that white people and people of color use and sell drugs at the same rate. What would you do to minimize these disparities?
Well, the disparities that exist actually are ones that there's a history there, of course, and we all know that the war on drugs is one that contributed to some of the disparate treatment in our criminal justice system. Fortunately, we're now able to look at drug use and drug addiction in a different way in our criminal justice system. And we're able to not only see it a little bit differently, but also understand that it is very often a situation that needs treatment as opposed to criminalization. It's one of the reasons why I'm working so hard with our diversion programs to make sure that we have the best programs in Contra Costa County to get people into treatment and out of our criminal justice system. We have some programs that are already in place. We do have a drug court. We have some diversion programs. But we need to make sure that all of our agencies are on board with us so that we are treating this in a holistic way and that we're pushing people in the criminal justice system and into treatment so that they can get the help that they need. So that's how I would approach it.
Thank you. Mr. Graves?
First and foremost, racism would not be tolerated under my administration. Anybody who arrests somebody in a violation of the Constitution, that case will not be filed. I do agree that people that we come in contact with can be saved. And I've looked through my entire career and said every victim, witness, or defendant we come in contact with, whether or not they're on drugs, is an opportunity to change a life. And I know from personal experience, I had a witness on my first homicide case, and she was addicted to drugs, and she was on the street. And by sitting down and just talking to her and telling her there's a better life and showing her the way, she actually took a program. She got her GED. She went on and is now a productive member of the community. She can even vote. And it shows me, and I carry her with me every day I come in contact with, is an opportunity to change a life. And my proudest moment was when I got to stand up with her after sober and she got her record expunged in front of a judge. And I got to stand there not as a prosecutor, but as her friend and standing in support of her. And that to me is amazing, and we need more of that in this community.
Thank you.
I'll use a rebuttal here, please.
All right. 1 minute, please.
Just to add, I do think that the expungement is very important, and that's why I'm so proud of the clean slate work that I've done in our communities. This is where for the last, I'd say 3 to 4 years, I've brought not only partnership with our community organizations and with the faith community to bring the clean slate program out of the courts and into the community. We've helped thousands and thousands of people to be able to clean up their records of some of these low-level offense and remove barriers that keep people from getting jobs and being productive members of our society, and barriers that keep people from getting their driver's license and getting into school. Some work, because it is exactly what we've needed to do for those people who have something, especially relating to drugs, but those drug crimes are still on their records. And this way, we've been able to clear the records and free them up to be able to get jobs and be productive members of our society.
Thank you. Mr. Graves, this question goes to you to start. Do you support creating an option to charge low-level drug possession as a misdemeanor rather than a felony? Why or why not? Would you publicly support a ballot initiative or legislation to create this option?
As a district attorney, I'm obligated to follow the law, and all low-level drug cases are misdemeanors. Follow the law in that regard, and I have no issue following the law. That's my duty as a prosecutor. What we need to look more at is how can we take the people who enter the system on a low-level misdemeanor and make sure we don't see them again. And unfortunately, too much in my 22 years, we see them come back again and again and again. And we start with drug programs and they don't finish them. And then they come back again, they get another drug program, they don't finish them. We need to find a way to reach people earlier to keep them out of the system. That is the real challenge, and I'm willing to lead on that. And I think being proactive and not treating each low-level drug case 2 days in jail, but actually giving a program complete and giving them incentive. When we get success, like the woman I was telling you about, it actually changes lives, and that's what we need to focus on.
Thank you. Ms. Becton.
Well, this is what I was speaking of earlier when I mentioned that I'm already working with especially the police chiefs around the county so that we can put in place the programs that we need to address our low-level nonviolent offenses, and that the drug cases. And it is correct, cases for simple possession are ones where we don't charge them as felony cases. They are considered misdemeanors. And many of them, depending on the type of case, probably shouldn't be charged at all, and we need to look at that as well. But the primary focus, I think, here is moving people away safely from the criminal justice system and diverting into treatment so that people can get the help they need and get out of that cycle.
Thank you. This next question will go to you, Ms. Becton. What would your office policies be regarding plea bargaining in drug offenses?
And did you say in drug offense cases?
In drug offense cases.
In drug. First of all, the plea bargaining is an area where once a case has been charged, and I think we need to go back to the starting point, which is if we're talking about the low-level nonviolent cases, we're going to be making every effort to divert those cases away from the criminal justice system. So plea bargaining is not something that would be taking place with respect to those cases, but because we would be hoping to find better alternatives for those cases that divert them completely away from the system. We will not use our attorneys' time nor the law enforcement to bring those cases into the criminal justice system. We'd find better alternatives like the lead partnering with law enforcement now out in Antioch and making sure that we have those alternatives available so that we're not prosecuting those cases in the first place. Other than that, as those cases, if those cases, and there would probably be more cases that involve sales on a high level that would come into our system than we would, just with any other case, offer the best options that we can to resolve the case at the earliest stages.
Thank you. Mr. Graves.
Plea bargaining drug case, I feel like I've already kind of talked about this, but we need to make sure we're doing targeted diversion and targeted pleas for that individual, making sure that we're addressing the problem and encouraging them to actually get off of drugs and giving them the resources to do it. I understand from 23 years that people are going to fail. They are. It's just the nature of a drug addiction. They're going to fail and come back to the system, but we need to be understanding and continue to find ways to help them. This may sound strange to many people in this room, but I'll tell you how I've had a lot of success before. I had a young girl who went to St. Mary's. She was addicted to opioids, and she came in as her first case. And she also did a residential burglary. And the defense attorneys in this county trust me enough. The defense attorney said, go ahead and talk to her. And I did. I sat down with her and said, you know, the law says you did a burglary. I'm supposed to send you to prison. I know. I said, what are you going to do? And she talked to me, and I had her commit to me what she was going to do. And I'll tell you what, she hasn't come back. Because she actually had somebody invested in her, and the challenge was put out to her. This is what you need to do. And she did it. And so having that human element and addressing their specific problem and making sure that we're dealing with them as a person, not just as a number, is critical in getting them to successfully complete diversion, probation, any drug program, and becoming a productive member of the community.
Thank you. All right, we have one more question. We have two more questions. Mr. Graves, this is going to you first. Do you support the Reducing Crime and Keeping California Safe Act of 2018, which undermines Prop 47 and 57?
I think Prop 47 and 57 have some flaws in them, and it needs to be addressed and it needs to be changed. I haven't looked complete, and I always hesitate to take a position on something without reading the entire act, which I believe Prop 47 and Prop 57, that happened. I don't think many people realized when they voted for Prop 47 that you could commit as many thefts as you want to, and it'll never be a felony. I don't think many people realized when Prop 57 was passed as a Safe Streets Act that it meant I would have to call victims of sexual assault when they got notice that the person they thought was going to be in custody for 10 years was now getting out early. I don't think people knew that. But I've had to make those calls, and it's very difficult. And we need to fix the system to make sure that we're protecting our victims. And I'm talking about victims. I talked to one child victim. There was a plea bargain, and the plea bargain was so that the child would be an adult when he got out of prison. Well, that's not true anymore after Prop 57. And I had to make that difficult phone call. And so there are things that we can do to change Prop 47 and 57. I think that there is so that we can achieve the purpose of keeping the public safe, yet keep up the intent behind 47.
Thank you, Ms. Beckman.
I would like to make just the distinction that Prop 47 and Prop 57 and some of the other recent criminal justice reform were voted by the people of the state of California are under attack by the legislation and I think what's important for us to understand here is that what's being argued is that those propositions are responsible for the most recent uptick in crime, especially with respect to property crime. But we have a study, and that's the UC Irvine study, which actually contradicts that argument. And I think we need to make sure that that argument is on the table when we discuss doing away with all of the criminal justice reforms that the people of California voted in. And that's the place where I have difficulty with the upcoming legislation. It is because of the fact that it attempts to tie the uptick in crime to those reform measures that we voted in, when actually the study by UC Irvine, which is the only study that we have so far that has looked at the statistics, say that it is quite to the contrary.
Thank you.
I'd like to rebut, please.
Go ahead, Mr. Graves, 1 minute.
We should always be careful when we cite studies in this regard. I'll actually cite to you to the San Francisco Chronicle and Sacramento newspapers about this tremendous uptick in property crime since Prop 47. That doesn't mean that it's generally necessarily a problem when if you steal under $950, you can do it 100 times, 200 times, and you'll never be held accountable on a felony anymore. One of the first cases that I saw after Prop 47 passed was a woman out on parole for residential burglary. She went to Sun Valley Mall, stole under $950, and it was going to be a misdemeanor, even though she had a lengthy history. So we need to be very careful. The community understand that property crimes and theft crimes have gone up, just like it has in San Francisco, and just like it has in East County, just like it has in Central County, and we need to be aware of the problem.
Rebuttal, please.
Yes, 1 minute, please.
Yeah. The distinction that I'm making is not, we all agree, the statistics are there, that we have had an uptick in property crimes in California. What has caused the uptick, and whether or not that uptick has been caused by the criminal justice reforms that are in place that have been voted by the people of California. And that's what the UC Irvine study points out. We know that there's an uptick in crime, but we need to get to the real cause of it and not blame the propositions that have brought in criminal justice reform. And I agree that we need to find a way to close some of the loopholes, and we have to do that work as well.
Thank you. All right, this question will go to you, Ms. Beckman. In this age of local cities and counties directing law enforcement toward our local authorities to follow the law.
Do you mind repeating that?
I don't at all,
please?
and I'm kind of reading this here, and I think we've got a couple of things in here that are a little confusing, so I'll read it again. In this age of local cities and counties directing law enforcement How will you support our local authorities to follow the law? I don't want to even suggest what I think that means. So
Okay. Well,
we could pass on that. I think they're trying to talk about the police, but let's let this one sit for a while, and we'll come back to this. If the author might want to do a little tweaking on that, we might have a chance for you to do that. So let's go to something a little bit that we more understand. Ms. Beckton, again, this goes to you. What does victims' rights mean to you? And victims' rights is in quotes.
victim rights for me means making sure that there's an opportunity for the victim to be at the center of everything that we're doing with respect to prosecution and with law enforcement. Victims' rights to me means that we make sure that we have a conversation with those who've been wronged by criminal activity, that we give that person an opportunity to be heard when they'd like to be heard. It also means that we find every effort that we can in our system, every tool that's available to us, to be able to make sure that the person has the resources they need. First of all, just in the early stages, to get our victims' advocates out, to reach out to them so that they have the support that they need to take them through a difficult process, such as a criminal proceeding. We need to make sure that the person has the resources that they need to begin the healing process and to bring closure to what has happened to them. Victims' rights for me means that we make the victim the center of everything that we do. We make sure that we remember that they are the most important, that they are the reason that we are doing what we're doing every day, and that we're here to protect them and make sure that they have all of the resources that we have available, that they are available to them.
Thank you. Mr. Graves.
Simply stated, victims' rights mean everything to me. That's why I became a prosecutor. Our office needs to become more victim-centered. We need to get more cases in the hands of a district attorney or prosecutor so they can respond to victims throughout and not sit it on a shelf and wait for trial to come. When you're a victim of crime, a phone call and somebody who cares about you as a person, because let's face it, that's what we're supposed to be doing. I don't know a victim who is asked to be a victim. I don't know a victim who's chosen to be a victim. So Marcy's Law is something I hold near and dear to me. It's part of the Constitution, but it's above and beyond that. It means doing everything within your power to make the victim's experience with the criminal justice system as painless as it can be without being re-victimized throughout the criminal justice system. It means talking to them. It means having our victim witness advocate out there. It means in my unit, a district attorney is required by me to meet with a child victim of sexual assault at least 3 times before they ever even consider putting that child on the stand. A court visit with that child. They need to sit down and get to know that child. Because you know what? That is what we're here for. That's what it's all about. And so when we talk about victims' rights, it is the single most important function of a district attorney's office.
All right, we've been at this about an hour, unless my compadre here does have one more burning question. I think this will be our last question before we go into the closing statements. Okay. Perhaps you can talk to Ms. Joan here and we can see if we can get that in if we haven't gotten it in. All right, this question. I think we've talked about this one already, but I'll read the question anyway, and I think we are going first with Mr. Graves. What do you feel are the problems with the current bail system? And I think we've discussed that.
We have discussed that
in some depth.
at length. I'm more than happy to answer it again if you want to hear my answer again.
Let's take a minute break. Joan, can I ask you to meet our citizen in the back there and make sure we don't miss a burning question that she has? Other than that, 16 questions tonight. Take a breather, my candidates. When we do the closing statements, we'll have Mr. Graves go first, Ms. Beckton go last. So, Joan, do we have another question? No. Okay. All right. Closing statements, Mr. Graves.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You know, today was the Community Violence Solutions Luncheon. It was a privilege to be there. And it reminded me about why I became a prosecutor. It's what that last question indicated. We're here for the victims. Being a prosecutor is about public safety and victims of crime. The forum that I've done, and other than that last question, we've done little to really talk about standing up for victims of crime in these forums. My compassion and support of victims of crime is what defines me as a prosecutor for the last 22 years. I've spent a large part of my career prosecuting child molesters and rapists, and I know I have friends who say, how can you do that day in and day out? How do you take that home with you? And I now tell them it's because I have the rare privilege of walking among heroes every day. The children, the teenagers, the adults who have been sexually abused, physically abused, the courage it takes for them to come forward and find their voice and talk to police officers, the courage it takes to come to the DA's office and meet a complete stranger. That takes real courage. The courage to go into court and look at 12 people you don't know and face your abuser in court takes real courage. They are true to the word, and I can guarantee you, as a district attorney, they will not be forgotten because I am a prosecutor.
Thank you. Ms. Becton.
Well, I'm proud to have the pleasure of serving as your district attorney. And I want to remind everyone that as a judge, I've heard every case type: criminal, civil, consumer, juvenile. All of that experience I bring with me, along with my management and leadership skills. I am committed to keeping our communities safe, committed to victims' rights. But I am also committed to the fact that there's so much more as a 21st century prosecutor to be done. I'm going to work and continue to work to bring better outcomes for our youth, to break that pipeline from our schools to our prison. I will continue the work that I've started for the mentally ill, to make sure that in those cases be diverted away from the criminal justice system, that we're doing that. And in addition to that, I'll make sure that we're diverting those low-level nonviolent offenses away from the criminal justice system so that we can free up the resources to work on the more serious cases that we see every single day. I have the endorsements of several congressmen, DeSaulnier, Miller, Thompson, McNerney, and Congressman George Miller as well. Democracy for America, the Sierra Club,
Thank you,
the
Ms.
building
Becton.
trades and labor. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you both the candidates tonight, Diana Becton, Paul Graves. I'm Cheryl Chambers, and again, I want to thank those that brought this forum to us tonight and those that came out to listen and those at home. The Contra Costa County Library, the West County League of Women Voters, the Contra Costa County Elections Department, and our friends in the back who are running all of the mics and the TV and everything, Contra Costa TV. So everyone have a safe drive home. Please remember to vote and register your friends. Thank you.
Okay, another one back. Thank you.
Thank you. Can I get a picture with each of you?
Absolutely.